Elon Musk's SpaceX is aiming to cement its position as a leading space enterprise with a mission that seeks to deliver 4 civilians to orbit for several days and then return them to Earth. And for this mission, SpaceX needed a technology partner, and looks like Steve Jobs is there to help and give it birth to this insane new partnership between Apple and SpaceX. SpaceX is planning to deliver 4 civilians to orbit for several days and then return them to Earth in the mission. The inspiration for flight is a more striving and technically difficult one than those directed over the summer by space companies founded by Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson. According to industry executives and consultants, it's the first taking in which only commercial astronauts or those flying without government backing will orbit, SpaceX claimed. Space Exploration Technology Corp., the formal name for the company led by Mr. Musk and President Gwynne Shotwell, has outwitted rivals by pushing to rapidly develop its space hardware and prove that it works, people familiar with the company say. Mr. Musk founded SpaceX in 2002, investing his own funds with the goal of eventually taking people to Mars. Along the way, the company won contracts from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, gaining agency support during the company's early years. Now, nearly 2 decades after its founding, SpaceX has helped to revive the country's space ambitions by arranging high-profile launches. Last year, the company blasted 2 NASA astronauts into orbit, where they stopped at the International Space Station. It was the first launch with humans from the U.S. in almost a decade. In the beginning, Mr. Musk, other than for the announcements of the mission, didn't talk about the inspiration for flight during his conversations. A SpaceX executive said, "The mission is a stepping stone. You have to clear this obstacle in order to do many more, that are bigger and grander and get us to the moon, Mars, and beyond." SpaceX's ability to develop rockets that can be used multiple times has lowered the cost of flying to space, analysts and space executives have said. Competitors are working on their own efforts to launch humans, but SpaceX has been made able to pursue more ambitious flights. For this week's flight, Inspiration 4 crew members are slated to fly almost 360 miles from Earth and travel around the planet for at least 3 days before splashing back down off the coast of Florida. The mission is scheduled to launch a little more than a month after Boeing Company, along with NASA, postponed a test flight of its own spacecraft that's meant to ferry astronauts to the space station due to stuck valves in the vehicle's propulsion system. Boeing had no comment, Virgin Galactic had nothing to say, and Blue Origin didn't respond to a request for comment. Blue Origin is also developing an orbital launch vehicle, but SpaceX has secured the bragging rights of taking NASA astronauts to orbit first, and possibly private ones as well, should this week's flight go off as planned. But how will Apple make this a reality? Well, it's unlikely that the consumer electronics company will build rockets and its own satellites. Apple is working on satellite technology to connect its phones to the internet without requiring a land-based carrier like AT&T or Verizon. Coincidentally, Elon Musk's SpaceX has announced plans to launch up to 42,000 satellites in order to set up a space-based communications network, Starlink. Keep in mind that only about 9,000 satellites have been launched in all of space history, about 5,000 of which are still in orbit, and only 2,000 are actually still operational. That SpaceX communications network is already at least partially functioning after the company launched 60 satellites via one rocket in May. Apple has been secretly staffing a team to find new ways to beam data directly between its devices and satellites. The team now has about a dozen engineers from the aerospace, satellite, and antenna design industries, according to Bloomberg News, citing people familiar with the matter. The project is in its early stages, the report said, but Apple CEO Tim Cook has expressed interest in the work. Apple products will play an important role in a SpaceX mission that will send an all-civilian crew into orbit, with Apple Watch Series 6, iPhone 12 Pro, and iPad mini involved in a number of health experiments designed to examine the impact spaceflight has on the human body. Apple's iPhone 12 Pro is being paired with the Butterfly IQ Plus ultrasound device to scan the crew's organs. The evaluation will help determine whether non-medical experts can use Butterfly IQ Plus's artificial intelligence guidance, which is presented through an accompanying app, to acquire clinical-grade images without assistance from the ground. Each Apple product will serve its own role during the data and sample collection. To be precise, the iPhone 12 Pro will further scan the organs of the crew members during the space flight. The experiment will be able to determine if civilians could use the Butterfly IQ by solely depending on its app. On the other hand, the Apple Watch will be responsible for collecting tons of data from the civilian crew, such as ECG activity, sleep, heart rate, movement, blood oxygen saturation, light intensity, and even cabin noise. Meanwhile, the iPad mini will look into the cognitive evaluations of the crew members via an app that goes by the name Cognition. An iPad mini 4 will be used to perform a series of tests using a special Cognition app. Researchers will then correlate the vital and environmental stats gathered by the Apple Watch and Dragon capsule's sensors with these cognitive test results to see how their performance matches their various physiological answers. It remains unclear if Apple plans to build its own satellites or if it will use existing satellites. Apple's interest is likely to transport data directly to devices, reducing the dependence on wireless carriers. The technology could enable Apple to circumvent a traditional wireless network and improve functions like location tracking. As part of the staffing effort, Apple has hired Michael Trela and John Fenwick, a former head of satellite engineering at Google and former head of spacecraft operations at Google, respectively, according to their LinkedIn profiles. Apple has also hired Matt Edis, the Bloomberg report said, who founded Edis Research, which sells wireless networking equipment. Apple would be the latest entrant into an increasingly crowded, high-stakes market that includes SpaceX and Amazon. Earlier this year, CNBC reported on Amazon's Project Kuiper, the e-commerce giant's plans to build a network of 3,236 satellites in an attempt to provide global internet access. Amazon announced this week that it would include its R&D headquarters for Project Kuiper in Redmond, Washington, not far from Amazon's home base in Seattle. And last year, Elon Musk's SpaceX launched the first 2 satellites of its Starlink network. The network is expected to be operational once at least 800 satellites are deployed. In 2015, Facebook decided against spending up to $1 billion on a satellite that would provide internet to underserved regions in Africa and other continents. Instead, Facebook opted to lease broadband onboard Spacecom Amos 6 satellite, which was destroyed when a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket exploded during fueling before launch in 2016. Microsoft founder Bill Gates, in the late 90s, helped fund Teledesic in an effort to build lower satellites to provide internet service, yet Teledesic closed in 2002. After racking up more than $9 billion in costs. The space industry is estimated to expand rapidly over the next 3 decades, with the satellite internet sector anticipated to expand at an exponential rate. Crew members will further perform cognitive evaluations with the Cognition app on an iPad mini software that is used by NASA-funded research studies. Let us take at all the medical benefits of providing these Apple products in the crew data collection. The first would be neurocognitive performance. Journeying through space can be stressful for both the human body and mind at the same time. This has a very direct impact on the behavior and actions of the astronauts. Dr. Matthias Bassner from the University of Pennsylvania has come up with multiple cognitive tests that will be put to use during this trip. The crew performance will be gauged next to a very broad spectrum of domains. It'll help in understanding how common people will react to going into space for the very first time. When in space, the bodily fluids tend to move irregularly. This makes the astronauts exposed to some medical complications. Imaging techniques like ultrasounds can be used in this situation to monitor the health of the Inspiration crew and also for the coming space flights. The IQ Plus ultrasound devices will be linked to iPhone 12 Pros and used for this purpose. Different organs such as the eyes, gallbladder, neck veins, and urinary bladder are observed. Dr. Mark Schallhammer from Johns Hopkins University will also be working with the crew. He and his team will investigate the readaptation to gravity after spaceflight. Sensor monitoring testing. The sense of up and down is lost by astronauts in zero gravity. This can lead to nausea, confusion, and headaches both in space and in returning to Earth. The Apple devices will be collecting environmental data, biomedical data, and biomedical samples from the 4 civilians in the SpaceX mission. It's worth noting that said software is also being used by NASA or the National Aeronautics and Space Administration for the research studies that it funds. According to Space Explored's Zach Hall, crew members will each wear an Apple Watch Series 6 to collect research-grade ECG activity, movement, sleep, heart rate and rhythm, blood oxygen saturation, and cabin noise data. The Dragon capsule will also capture additional data on things like light intensity, of which, of course, can't be measured by the Apple Watch. Additionally, crew members will use iPhone 12 Pro to acquire data and view images from an AI-guided organ scanning system called Butterfly IQ Plus, which is an ultrasound tool designed to be used by non-medical experts. The goal here will be to see if the iPhone can be used by an average person to self-acquire clinical-grade images without guidance from ground support. The images will provide a timeline of biological changes before and during spaceflight for further study. Ultimately, researchers hope that all this data will help them to learn from the first time how average healthy people are affected by space travel, as opposed to professional NASA astronauts who are in prime physical condition that rivals that of most Olympic athletes. Apple and SpaceX working together is a really dream team. The world's best gadget company and leading space tech manufacturer can definitely make the future, and honestly, who doesn't want to see these two collaborate and produce something revolutionary? Subscribe and click the video on the screen.